Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. You know, it's always such a delight to be here with you in the studio once again, and I'm curious, how familiar are you with the free will versus determinism debate? Is that something on your consciousness?
For me, never.
Well, it's going to be today. You may not realize that this is a hot topic among many today. Do we choose the life we live, or are we influenced by nature, God, DNA, personal experience, and evolution, and so influenced that our actions and decisions actually turn out to be predetermined and not by free will? And I just found out today from my daughter-in-law, Maggie Hedges, that this is also a very important topic among followers and teachers of astrology who plan out according to, who chart according to planets and rising suns and falling moons. And there's a deterministic factor in there. So we are in a contemporary time of big questions. And today I am so fortunate that my brilliant guest, David Lawrence, has written a book titled Biochemical Robots, in which he addresses the question, is free will an illusion? Do we truly possess personal autonomy, or are our actions determined by external and internal forces? David holds a degree in philosophy from UCLA and another degree in law from USC. We are honored to have with us a real thinker. I'm so much looking forward to our conversation today, and with that, let's bring on our guest, David Lawrence. Welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thanks. Hey, Charlie. Hey, Paul.
Oh, Paul is absent from the microphone.
They don't let me talk very often here. I get to say hi twice in a row here. Okay.
He's not used to that. So, David, as I mentioned to you earlier this week, and we even talked about it before the show, I was not sure how relevant this subject would be to my listeners, and you assured me it was a hot topic. Well, little story as it happens, I just returned late this morning from my monthly visit to a monastery where I pray for 3 days and work with different people there. While I was there, I met two young men, Fernando and Tanner, who had just recently graduated Pepperdine University with the degrees in, catch this, philosophy. How many people have degrees in philosophy? And I met two of them. Now, not only are they very personally interested in our topic for today, but they assured me that just how relevant this subject is among younger adults in the USA. And I know that echoes your sentiments. Can you tell me about that? What's going on with this debate today?
Well, it is an important question. You do see a lot of this springing up on podcasts all over the place. It's a hot topic among podcasts that involve physics, especially quantum physics. And there's 4 or 5 of them that just delve into the subject along with other related subjects. It's important because it really goes to the heart of who we are. What are we? Are we a bunch of attributes like color of our eyes, color of our hair, how tall we are, our gender, genetics, birthplace, etc.? Well, we are that in some sense. In another sense, maybe more fundamental, we're a conscious experience. And we think, we perceive, we observe, we interact with the world, we make choices. We do that the moment we get up to the moment we go to bed. We're not just a bucket of attributes, we are a conscious subject experiencing life in the world. If you don't have free will, it goes out the window. The world is determined, our thoughts, actions, our mental experience are caused by physical events. We don't control them. We have nothing to do with them. They're forced upon us. Personal identity is non-existent. We are biochemical machines, as you said, catchphrase for the book. It goes to the heart of who we are. It also is important because what is the alternative? Determinism is a philosophy of disempowerment. We don't control anything. Our thoughts aren't ours. We don't control our actions. Can't influence others. Can't affect the world. I mean, we're victims. We are perpetual victims, and that's really what philosophy of determinism amounts to. That's not a pretty picture. Sometimes truth isn't pretty, right? But we don't have to accept it as some compelling proof. And in the case of determinism, there isn't any. A lot of proof against it. Well, part of the reason I think it's a hot topic is responsibility and morality. And that's talked about on philosophy shows, physics shows, psychology shows, sociology shows. It spans the spectrum, as you were saying. Those people that you ran into suggested. Don't have responsibility if the world is determined. Can't be responsible if you don't control your actions, if you can't prevent them. You have nothing to do with them, and that's the philosophy of determinism.
So it really negates
morality.
It negates any idea of personal autonomy. What difference? What kind of person I am? If it's predetermined, what kind of person I am? I have no, according to the tenets of determinism, I have little to no say in my character, my decisions, how I love, how I care, what I do, what I choose. It's determined by these external forces that have been internalized somehow, like our DNA and our history of experience. But you know, it loses, to me, it loses an essential factor of humanity, of the basic part of what it means to be human.
And it's not that you have little say; you have no say, no control.
That's
gone.
crazy.
You're a victim.
That's crazy. So you know what I'm going to do? I've got a little bit of a structure to start, and then we're going to go free flow. But in my structure to start, I think it would be very helpful for our audience if you would offer for us, and I'm going to call it a layman's definition, because I know you philosophers can get very technical, and I know you're capable of speaking very layman terms. Give me sort of layman definitions of determinism and free will, so everybody's on the same page and we're not making assumptions, we're talking on the same subject.
Well, I think the layman definition is the definition. Will is exactly what common sense suggests. The ability to form intentions, take actions that are deliberate, to influence reality. That's what free will means, and that's what common sense suggests, and that's what we think it is as we go about our lives.
Well, what leads us to think opposite of that?
The opposite of that is, well, there's several options, but determinism is the main polar opposite. Our lives are determined. We don't control our thoughts. We don't control our actions. Causal chain, physical events, controls everything we think and do. It started at the Big Bang, like a big set of cosmic dominoes were unleashed forward. Our thoughts, our experiences, our actions are just part of that chain.
You know what I think of from the Big Bang? And I think of, my audience knows I come from a theological perspective of the Christian mystics. And, it's not the show will be on that subject, but that is a very strong influence in my life. And that the Big Bang seems to me to offer the opportunity for change. It is a movement toward change. It's always evolving, always morphing, always changing. And that seems to me to be an essential part of the Big Bang, how then is it determined from how many billions of years ago that human behavior is going to be dictated to us and not so much change oriented by our own desires and intentions and goals?
Well, determinism is a scientific look. It uses the scientific framework. It's materialistic, it's physicalist. There may be changes, but change is driven by physical events, driven by physical forces, operating on physical events, in a universe that's entirely physical. And what we experience are just mere reflections, that physical stuff as it manifests in our brain neurons. Philosophers called epiphenomena. So what we think we're experiencing and doing and thinking and reasoning and choosing is just mirror image of physical events. They change. Our experience changes, but it's driven entirely changes in a physical material substrate.
I don't even know if this applies, but you know what occurred to me? First, I was going to ask you about, so according to the determinist, it was predetermined who I would marry, that I would be with Pam. But how does determinism, how does that function in the birth of a child and my rearing of the child? How is that predetermined? That seems to me to be so unpredictable.
Well, here's an even more global one. How is it determining this conversation we're having about determinism? The self-contradiction is that's at the heart of all determinist principles. Contradict themselves because what they're saying is our thoughts, the reflection of physical events. Right? If that's true, then their thought, that very thought, is just a reflection of physical events. It's not based on truth. There is no truth. Truth, the determined universe, is whatever we're caused to believe true. So one of the absurdities in the fundamental conflict, whether it's raising children, whether it's thinking or talking about anything, is presuming we have access to truth. And determinism is a set of truth claims. If the truth claims are saying there is no truth, and that's the contradiction. My thoughts are determined. Really? Well, then I guess you were just determined to say that.
And where is the truth in that?
Say it again?
I said, where is the truth in that? If it's predetermined, truth is an existential reality, but it is, in my mind, it is very relational based.
Exactly. Determinism is saying, I know the truth, the world is determined. It's also saying the opposite. There is no truth. Our thoughts are caused by physical events. Whatever we think true is caused by physical events. And the reply to that is, well, then that thought is too. We're just caused to believe it. There's a contradiction at the basis of all determinist claims. This is the truth. You don't know the truth because my experiences are caused by physical activity.
Okay, let's look at this from a perspective, because you wrote about something I read that you wrote about influence and probabilism. Am I stating that correctly? That there is probability of our decisions based on our history of experience, based on the culture we live in, based on our DNA, based on the way we're raised, that I can predict the behavior of many people in large decisions, but not 100%. I can't predict 100%, but I can tell you the likelihood or the probability that they will decide something. How do we make a difference between probabilities and sort of stated inviolable actions that we're going to take? It just it doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, you hit on the second major problem behind all determinist thought. The first one is that contradiction that I talked about. There is no truth. And so you can't even say that determinism is true if our thoughts are caused. The second big problem is exactly what you said. Determinist philosophy confuses influence and control. Okay? So we could be influenced by all kinds of things.
Yes.
It allows you to predict our likely behavior. Influenced by our bodies, and we're influenced by our background and our parents and our genetics, etc.
Right.
Those are all influences, but determinism says they're all factors of dominion. They cause us to do things. They are what determines our lives. And what's so obvious about this is why? Why aren't they just factors of influence? What makes them factors that control us other than a determinist interpretation? And the answer is nothing. We don't need to be determined by our bodies. There's no justification for that. Of course, we're profoundly influenced by it. Can't walk without legs. There's all kinds of dysfunctions that we're subject to. What does that have to do with free will? It just means that we have limits, that free will isn't absolute. And the idea of probability, that because of all these influence, patterns form, and they do. No question. Highly influenced. Another way to say this big conception of determinism is that it's another way to say what I've just been saying. They think free will has to be absolute.
Yes.
There's no such thing as just influence that forms probable patterns within which you still choose, and those patterns are a reflection, large measure, of your choice. The determinist, you have to control all these factors of influence. And Harris says, and this is a basic paraphrase, is that have free will, we would have to control all the factors that determine us. Put aside the fact that that's a little bit begging the question aspect of that. Why would we have to control all the factors of influence? No reason why we would have to, and there's no reason why they're factors of control.
You know, so far in our discussion, we have gone down the path of leading listeners to understand that we're not necessarily protagonists of determinism, although, you know, you've not stated that, and I want to know your position later. But a couple of things come to mind. One is some of the most brilliant thinkers we have today are determinists. And I'm going to think of somebody that parts of your book, Biochemical Robots, is written in response to Sam Harris' book, Free Will. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with Sam Harris, he's a hugely popular neuroscientist, philosopher, lecturer, debater, podcast host, and best-selling author. I mean, Sam Harris is extremely influential. But Sam Harris, in his book, Free Will, seems to adopt a rather stringent determinist conclusion, does he not?
He does.
As much as we've said the logic of it, what is the logic of a Sam Harris that is a bright man, a caring man, a human man, and he's involved in charity work and doing good things? You know, what makes him a determinist?
I think it's largely the scientific outlook. As I was saying before, science looks around and measures and draws physical relations between physical events, and that's the stuff of the universe. But I think it's largely due to a scientific bent. I think it's largely to do with not having worked out the inherent problems in determinist thought, which he doesn't go into in the book. He doesn't raise the self-contradictory nature of determinist thought. You can't get around it. Either there's truth, or you're determined to think what's true. And if you're determined to think what's true because all your thoughts are determined, you can't say that anything is true. He doesn't mention it. He doesn't address it. By the way, if I could throw in something, we all have
I want you to, yeah.
I think he's a smart guy.
Oh,
Everything that you said. Smart and intellectual and articulate, and seems to have a good sense of ethics and so forth. But everybody has their blind spots, intellectual and otherwise.
Tell me this, as a theocentric individual. I was just talking to our philosophers, and we were at an abbey, and their very young men, 20, they just graduated from Pepperdine University, Fernando and Tanner. And I was explaining to them one of the fundamental propositions in the Christian faith. And Christian faith is my mother tongue. I'm open to other religious interpretations, and I think people are searching for God in several different ways. But my mother tongue is Christianity, and that's the one I speak the best, and the one I've studied most. But David, we hold dear the unbelievable, that cannot be scientifically proven. And I'll just name 3 events that are strong in Christian theology and that are questioned by many rational thinkers today. But we believe in the incarnation, that the supernatural spiritual became human being through a miraculous event called virgin birth. And then we believe the same individual died and got up and walked and ascended into intimacy with the divine, and they call it the ascension. Those are not provable, and we hold them as people of faith. We hold them by faith. We believe in the unbelievable, and that impacts very much. It doesn't control me, but it impacts and influences my decision. How might a determinist, do they just totally ignore that strong faith belief? Because to me, determinism is an act of faith as much as deity is an act of faith, because you have to believe in the unprovable. How does that strike anything with you about what's at hand here, what's at play with the Christian tradition of believing the unbelievable?
Yes, and the answer is that your intuitions and your thoughts and are causal effects and nothing more. They're no different than any other thought. Determinism is the great leveler. What you think is intuition, a determinist would say, is just a reflection of chemical processes and events in your brain were caused by prior chemical processes that were caused by prior ones that go all the way back to the Big Bang. So they would say, look, you're just having the experience of having intuition. You're not having anything. Didn't choose it. Didn't call for it. Isn't even yours. You're being forced to have experience.
Being forced by what? Being forced by what, David?
Something to you. Right?
Being forced by what?
Physical events. Causal forces. And that's the irony of it all. Unthinking, insentient, living, physical forces that don't think, don't reason, that don't believe, that can't observe, are forcing you to have these experiences that, among other things, are based on thought and concepts, reason. It's absurd when you think about the premises of determinist thought. Well, how do these unthinking forces happen to be forming patterns? They're giving you an intuition of something that you consider to be useful, valuable, or real. How do they do that? They don't think. Like the monkey sitting in the room for long enough to produce Shakespeare's works? It's unlikely.
I have one question, and then I want to take a break, and we're going to continue, and I look forward to continue even more deeply. You were talking about mental conditions and experiences that don't drive, but that determine our behavior. It seems to me that from your explanation, that determinists are taking mental processes, mental acuity, and the ability to amalgamate, cross-pollinate, and come up with something on our own, is disregarded by determinists. The determinists say it's telling you what to do, and I'm saying it's giving me information for a choice for me to do.
Right, and they'd say that all of your thoughts are mechanical, causal byproducts. You have nothing to do with them, and the feeling of choice is illusory. So you really sort of, I don't know if you used a phrase earlier as something like life-affirming, the opposite. It's not life-affirming.
It's not.
It's not real, and there's no proof that it exists. The idea that your thoughts are all these mechanical effects is being told to you by somebody who's thinking. Is that a mechanical effect? I mean, it's absurd on so many levels. We've talked about two of them. There's many others.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
right.
why I say it feels to me as much a matter of faith that I believe in a not predetermined but a preconceived notion that everything must fall under that heading, under that paradigm. And I falsely I have sort of willy-nilly chosen to take this route, and then I'm stuck to it.
It's funny, in the book I say probably a half dozen times that determinism is a matter of faith. I say exactly what you just said, and I call it the gospel of causation in a few places.
Okay, I love that. We'll break with the gospel of causation, and we'll come back in just a bit. Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and we are having a conversation today with David Lawrence, and we're talking about a subject that I did not know was so relevant and so prominent in our culture, especially more in the youth than it is in us old people. And it is our life determined? Our circumstances and, our personal makeup and personal histories actually determine what we are going to do, leaving us no choice? Or do we indeed have personal autonomy and free will while we are influenced by a number of things? We are not determined. And so that brings me to a question that we had talked about earlier that I think we slightly addressed earlier, but I think it's important to address this now. And that is, why is determinism and free will such an important and relevant topic for today? And you gave me a simple one-sentence answer, and I'm wondering if it would be the same one-sentence answer you gave me before that I loved.
Well, we didn't discuss very much the moral aspects of it.
Okay.
Or the responsibility aspects of it. What I guess I focused on up front that you're thinking about is it goes to the very heart of who we are and how we define ourselves and what we consider our lives to be. And if we're determined, that takes away all aims and aspirations and projects and goals. I've been determined. I bother. Whether you bother or not, it's been determined too. So that was sort of the initial framework.
Let me tell you the sentence that you gave me that I really liked. You boldly said the determinist free will debate is the most important question there is. I was struck by that. Follow up on that for me.
Well, okay, you've got who we are, you've got the nature of the self, you've got a philosophy that takes it away, you've got a philosophy that is about disempowerment, being a victim. That ain't a good thing, right? That ain't going to get the world to a better place or us to develop as people. We can't do anything. And the third reason it's pretty damn important is that there is no morality or personal responsibility, actions that we're forced to do. We don't choose, that we're doing based on causal force, that we have no say in. And determinists do all this kind of fancy dancing to come up with these crazy formulas about what personal responsibility is. And the only problem is that the determined world, leaving out the responsibility part of it.
Yeah, the responsibility and morality. I like the way you brought in morality to it, because I think that's an essential factor that works in here.
If we're determined by physical forces, bosons and leptons and quarks and all of that, they don't have any conception of morality, and they're causing what we do. They don't have any conception of fairness. They're physical things.
Here was a question that we came about, in talking about free will or probabilism or influence as opposed to predetermined choice. You had asked the question or proposed the question, does free will have to be absolute? Determinism is absolute by definition, is it not?
Yes.
So does free will in turn have to be absolute?
Footnote.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I wanted to point out there's a footnote exception for probability. Determinists allow the fact that there are probable events sprinkled through sequences of causal chains, so they're okay with probability, physical probability. But other than that, it's absolute, as you say. Wanted to just get in that footnote.
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense. It's like, why do we have prisons? Why do we have jails? If you were predetermined to do this, there is no reformation. There is nothing to reform. There's nothing to change, nothing to grow into, because you're going to do what you're going to do when you get out. It has... Exactly.
You'll constantly hear determinists lapsing immediately into free will language when they're talking about prisons and deterrence and rehabilitation and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's a famous biologist who's a determinist who says, I'm paraphrasing, neural cascades produce our thoughts and actions. Show me neuron just fires out of the blue without a causal antecedent, and we can talk about free will. 2 minutes later, that same guy says, now, it doesn't mean that we should let criminals run around on the streets. Got a broken car, you got a broken car, you fix it. Now, hold on a second. He has entirely abandoned all determinist principles in 2.5 seconds. He's now talking about our ability to go and stop criminals. Well, we don't control our actions. How can we do that? We can't prevent harm to others because the universe is determined. Everything that happens is going to happen. All of a sudden, in 2 seconds flat, and he's not the only one, Harris does it, they all do it. In order to justify what you said, punishment, morality, deterrence, a justice system, has to have free will. What determinists do is lapse into free will language. That's all they can do. Harris says that we need a justice system to assess risks and protect people. Well, really? Well, again, you could dissect this. All of a sudden, determinism went out the window. How can we assess risks? We can't assess anything. What we think about risk is whatever we're caused to believe. Determinist, follow your own gospel, right? So now how are we going to protect innocent people? We have to take action to protect innocent people, but we don't control our actions. Or are we going to determine who's innocent? We don't control our thoughts. This shows how difficult it is for determinists to dance around the idea that responsibility and morality fly out the window if we're just mechanical robots following pre-programmed physical causes. They got to lapse into free will language.
I want to go into another dimension, and it would be the moral dimension, dimension, and it would be, and it certainly fits into choice. But how does this debate of determinism and free will, how does it relate to or impact or is impacted by the spiritual? I'm talking the divine. And then my daughter-in-law talked about, she listened to she said it was a very fascinating podcast on astrology. And, not just, I'm talking about the deep astrologers that really do deep study and, are very well versed in the planets and see things going on. They tend to be a bit more determinist. How does that spiritual element interact or inform upon free will or determinism?
Well, I think astrology is very easy to reconcile with free will. I mean, astrology at the end of the day we have to go back to that difference between influence and control. I understand astrology, and I'm no expert. You still have free will, and it's still offering you guidance, but it's saying that you are subject to these influences. Those influences may come from planetary alignment or what have you.
Right.
Be mindful. See, I see astrology as saying be mindful of these influences, and I think of astrology as actually supporting free will. Because what's the point of pointing out all of these influences if you're not giving knowledge by which to navigate the ship?
Excellent. Yeah, that's an excellent retort. I think that is true. I've dabbled, just briefly dabbled a bit in astrology, and I was very impressed with some of the conclusions and some of the information. But it was then, if it was suggested I was in some, I don't even know the language, David. I'm not even sure. I was in Cancer's orbit or whatever, and something was going to happen. I still had a choice of how I'm going to respond to that. These are opportunities or difficulties that I can face, but I have a choice of how I deal with that. So I concur. It's an area of influence, and it's an area of strong influence. I think that, and then in theology, there is a theology, by the way, there is a theology of theistic determinism, that God created everything to be omniscient. God knows what's going to happen, knows everything ahead of time, and omniscience, not omniscient, I'm sorry, omniscience. And since this deity knows everything, that it is bound to happen, and yet I think the Holy Writ is clear that the deity, the intelligent, because I believe intelligent design, I believe in the Creator, and that the Creator created a system, if you will, of opportunities of either adopt the system that the Creator adopted, or you can reject that, and there are consequences to be faced. And I think free will is very strong of the Christian narrative. I think the Judaism is very strong in that. I'm not familiar with Islam, so I can't tell you, but free will really applies there. So it's important. I've got my final question as we're going to go. This is something you and I landed on accidentally in our discussion, but we both felt it was very meaningful. And that is, how is the idea of meaning in life impacted or influenced by this debate? Is your meaning in life determined? Do you choose your meaning in life? Do you align with your meaning in life? Is it causal? Is it choice? What thoughts do you have on meaning and the debate that we're talking about?
Well, the determinist answer would be there's no meaning to life other than what you're caused to believe. Libertarian, the free will advocate, would say, of course there's a meaning to life. And the framework for that may be a divinity, a created universe where we're accorded free will, or it may be natural biological arising of consciousness as they call it, an emergent property of free will, along with consciousness. But libertarian, in whatever framework, would say we're part of determining meaning of life. That's our job, maybe our most fundamental job. And that's a good way of putting, probably a better way of putting what I opened with, which is that determinism takes away self-identity. Well, implicit in
it
that
does, yes.
There is no meaning in life. It takes away all meaning to life. It's not a search. Life isn't a search for the truth, for self-improvement. It's a mechanical process of thoughts dictated by physical, non-thinking events. Meaning has no meaning.
Yes. You know, I came upon a discussion in writing that was with physicist Wolfgang Pauli and psychiatrist Carl Jung. Wolfgang Pauli coming from a primarily a scientific point of view. However, he was looking for meaning of life, that there is something beyond just the pure static science, or I don't know if you call science static, but you know, this pure rational approach, and he thought there was something else involved. And Carl Jung, obviously, on the other side, you know, thought the human condition was very much in establishing meaning and purpose and identity and love and, you know, use of archetypes and sorts of things. Wolfgang Pauli wrote this, and, you know, a brilliant physicist. I think he was a Nobel Prize winner, was he not?
I think so.
Yeah, and he said that the universe itself is sans meaning, that the cosmos, the creation, which, you know, I don't necessarily adopt, but I think it's a very helpful for our conversation, that it is without meaning, and that wrote this: meaning is not a fundamental function of reality, because science and the existence of the cosmos is sans meaning. However, there is meaning, but it is an interpretation imposed by the human observer. I love that. That meaning is what, in a sense, meaning is what I determine it to be. Now, as a theist, I think there's meaning that is provided in divine text that gives us an idea of love and of care and of sacrifice, of humanity, of grace, of a number of different things that we have choices of, and we can align ourselves with this divine intent. And so it is superimposed in a sense. It's still superimposed by me as a human observer. But even if I don't have an intelligent design, meaning is whatever I determine it to be.
Yeah, that's what's so absurd about determinism. How are all these physical events going to bring meaning? Complicated structures and frameworks of meaning, language and logic, and mathematics and reasoning, syntax, all these vast, Gothic, Baroque structures of meaning are internally organized based on meaning. So how are these physical elements that Pauli says are devoid of meaning going to do this? I mean, a bunch of particles bang against each other and you got Mozart's symphony. Well, that doesn't seem like a very credible accounting how the world works. A bunch of physical particles bang against each other and voila, Hamlet of Hamlet. Doesn't seem like a credible accounting. Certainly requires an explanation, which determinists don't give. And by the way, I want to say something, perhaps it's a footnote, but there's two kinds of determinists. There's the kind along Harris's ilk, and many, many like him, who, if this is how it is, it's indisputable. There are other scientists and physicists who say, look, the jury's out. I think the world is determined, but who knows? We don't have the definitive answer. There are people who can be properly characterized as determinists, who think of themselves as determinists, but have that open mind that neither has been proven, and that and that physics changes and our paradigms of reality change over time, and the jury hasn't rendered a verdict. So I didn't want what I've been saying to be thought of as directed to all determinists. It's directed to those who are in the Sam Harris camp of, well, it's indisputable. We know, he says in his book, we know that determinism is true. It's indisputable. Our brain makes our decisions before we even know about it. There is a bunch of, maybe you could call them agnostic determinists in a sense, say, the question isn't resolved. Until it is, I'm not going to say for certain that it is. And Brian Greene is one of those types of agnostic physicists who, look, I'm a determinist, I'm a scientist, I believe that's what governs the universe. But it's not been proven.
Yeah.
Physics can't say that it's the case, like Wolfgang Pauli. So we have to keep an open mind, in effect. I'm paraphrasing.
I like that. I think that, and let's kind of wrap up with this idea, because I think, either side, without respect for its counterpart, is missing a point, because, I'm very, very, personally, I'm very, very attached to influence, history of experience, DNA, divine intervention, science, all of these come into play that influence me, but I nevertheless, at the end of the day, I definitely do make bad decisions based on influence. I fall into that. And so I could almost say it was almost like a predetermined that I was going to do this, but I still nevertheless had a choice, and I can take a look at it and I can retract, or I can modify for the future. That I do have choice, and now I'm writing a book on choice now, and I think everything we do in life is a choice, and we get to choose, and I'm very strong.
Not calling it Biochemical Robots, are you?
No, I've got to. I couldn't, David. I couldn't compete. Your book is too good.
Oh, that's not true. That's not true.
Well, look.
What you just said is basically how I would put it. Is that choice is situational. We have a lot of influence.
Yeah.
In some situations we have very little, and you make mistakes. And in others you're calm and are in a disposition to make a good decision, and other times you're wired and in a position to make a bad decision for all the influences that are putting you in that space. It's a matter of degrees. If you throw out this absolute nonsense, it's a matter of degree.
I so concur, and I'd like to close with encouragement to our audience. I try not to be a preachy sort of podcast person, but I just want to encourage our audience that you are a vital, contributing member of society, and a vital contributing member to your own sanity and your own essential core. And if you think you're determined, you're taking that privilege away. You are voluntarily giving that to something that does not want you to be the decision maker. And I want to encourage our listeners to ponder this. And take the not quite the middle road, but understand the influential factors. But then we have opportunity to make choices based on those factors.
Amen. Well, we do give away our power. We do get fears, which we say to ourselves, our free will is nil or very little. And,
David,
that's an encouraging thought you said.
Thank you.
Because it's saying you don't have to give it away.
Yes. David Lawrence, I want to thank you. You are a brilliant guest. You have just brought a whole new dimension to our show that we have not so much talked about, but I hope it's encouraging to our listeners. It's very encouraging to me. I will put your book, it just passed me, robotic.
Are we really biochemical robots?
Are we really chemical robots? I will put that in the show notes. Anything else you want me to put in the show notes to get a hold of you?
I have a website called biochemicalrobots.com. Anybody can reach me.
Biochemicalrobots.com. Okay, I will make sure I put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show with me today. It's been a total delight.
Thanks for having me, Charlie.
You bet. I also want to thank all our listeners for tuning into the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.